Part 1. April 1885. Sit up straight, Mary Beth. And Timothy, please stop swinging your legs. You're getting Emily's dress dirty. Addie Montgomery moved through the passenger car, straightening collars and smoothing flyaway hairs as the train rumbled westward through the Rocky Mountains. To the casual observer, her gentle yet firm demeanor revealed nothing of the weariness behind her eyes. At 26, Adelaide Montgomery had already seen more hardship than most twice her age. Today marked her 12th orphan train journey as a chaperone for the Children's Aid Society, and the responsibility of 12 young lives weighed on her slender shoulders. Her gaze drifted to the scowling boy staring defiantly out the window. Jamie Sullivan, age 10. 3 previous placements all failed. A troublemaker, according to his file, but Addie knew better. "Are you not hungry this morning?" she asked, sliding into the seat beside him. Jamie shrugged without looking at her. Not for that slop. Instead of reprimanding him, Addie reached into her pocket and produced a small peppermint stick. "Don't tell the others," she whispered conspiratorially. "It wouldn't be fair if they knew I was playing favorites." Jamie's eyes, sharp and wary beyond his years, studied her face before he tentatively accepted the candy. "Why bother being nice? You're just going to hand me over to some farmer who wants free labor." Addie felt the familiar ache in her chest. "Not if I can help it," she said softly, more to herself. As the boy sucked on the peppermint, Addie's mind drifted to her own childhood and to the overcrowded orphanage in New York where she'd spent her early years after her mother's death. The image of Miss Abernathy, the one kind matron who'd taught her to read by candlelight, floated through her memory. "Did you know I was an orphan too?" Addie asked. Jamie's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're lying." "I never lie about important things, Jamie. I was placed with a family in Michigan when I was 10, your age. They promised the society I'd receive an education. And did you?" Addie's lips pressed into a thin line. "I learned plenty, just not from books. Endless chores, an unheated attic, dirty looks from the farmer's wife who feared her husband's wandering eyes. No schooling, despite promises made." At 15, Addie had slipped away in the night with nothing but the clothes on her back and a stolen $5. "What happened?" Jamie asked, curiosity temporarily overcoming his sullenness. "I survived," Addie said simply. "And later I found work with the Aid Society because I wanted things to be different for children like us." Jamie snorted. "It doesn't seem different. You are still shipping us off to strangers." Addie sighed, unable to argue with his assessment. The society believed they were doing good work, rescuing children from overcrowded city slums and placing them with wholesome rural families. But the lack of proper oversight troubled her deeply. "Look there," she said, gesturing to the window, where majestic peaks and valleys stretched toward the horizon. "Timber Ridge, Colorado is just beyond those mountains. Perhaps things will be different there." She patted the leather satchel containing her official paperwork of placement, contracts, health certificates, and her own secret notebook where she documented the true conditions of every home she'd visited. Someday, she hoped, these records would help reform the system from within. As Addie rose to continue her rounds, Jamie grabbed her sleeve. "Miss Montgomery, is Timber Ridge nice?" For a moment her professional facade cracked. "I don't know, Jamie. But I promise I won't leave until I'm sure you're with people who will be good to you." He nodded once before returning his gaze to the window, but not before Addie caught the flicker of hope in his eyes. That tiny spark was what kept her going, despite everything. "Children, remember what we practiced. Stand straight, speak clearly, and smile," Addie instructed as the train slowed into Timber Ridge Station. The platform bustled with curious onlookers, and Addie recognized the familiar mixture of expressions of compassion, judgment, and calculation of potential benefit. She'd seen it in every town. As the children lined up with their small bundles of possessions, Jamie deliberately scuffed his freshly polished shoes against the platform and untucked his shirt. "Jamie," she whispered sternly, bending to retuck it, "please don't make this harder." "They only want workers anyway," he muttered, but grudgingly allowed her to straighten his collar. A prim woman with iron gray hair approached, clipboard in hand. "Miss Montgomery?" I'm Mrs. Wilson, head of the placement committee. Welcome to Timber Ridge. Thank you for your hospitality, Addie replied automatically, offering the practiced smile that never reached her eyes. The children are tired but excited to meet their potential new families. Mrs. Wilson's gaze swept critically over the children. Pastor Wilson will offer a prayer, then Dr. Fleming will examine them before the placement meeting at 3 o'clock. The doctor's examination consisted of checking teeth and feeling foreheads for fever, hardly the thorough medical attention Addie had requested. Meanwhile, a portly man circled the older boys like a vulture, clearly assessing their strength. "Where is Sheriff Holt?" Mrs. Wilson huffed. "He's meant to be here as a committee member." "He is probably handling another dispute at the Lucky Strike Saloon," muttered the doctor. As if summoned by his name, a tall figure approached from the far end of the platform. Even from a distance, Addie could tell this was a man who commanded attention without trying. Dust coated his long coat and his badge caught the afternoon sunlight. "My apologies for the delay," he said, his voice a deep baritone that matched his imposing presence. "There was trouble at—" He stopped abruptly, noticing the children. "Sheriff Holt, this is Ms. Montgomery from the Children's Aid Society," Mrs. Wilson said with a wide smile. "Sheriff Caleb Holt handles law enforcement for Timber Ridge and the surrounding area." Addie extended her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sheriff Holt. Call me Caleb." His handshake was firm but brief. His eyes, a striking shade of blue, was more interested in examining the children than in social niceties. "How many children this time?" 12. Addie answered, ages 6 to 14. "And their backgrounds, criminal checks, medical histories?" His questions came rapid fire, each one pricking at Addie's professional pride. "The society thoroughly screens all children, Sheriff." She kept her tone polite but felt her spine stiffen. "These are children seeking homes, not criminals." "With all due respect, Ms. Montgomery," he replied, his gaze now fully on her, "this town has had unfortunate experiences with previous placements. A 16-year-old boy, who was placed last year, set fire to a barn. I can assure you, you can assure me of nothing." His eyes hardened. "You'll place these children and board the train back east, while we live with the consequences." Addie had encountered skepticism before, but Sheriff Holt's direct challenge felt personal. "Perhaps your town should examine its treatment of these children before placing blame," she countered. "Children don't act out without reason." A tense silence fell between them, interrupted only when Jamie sidled up beside Addie. The sheriff's gaze shifted to the boy, sharp with assessment. "And who might you be, young man?" Jamie thrust his chin up defiantly. "Jamie Sullivan. Who are you?" "JB?" Addie cautioned, but she noticed something in the sheriff's expression change, almost a flicker of recognition, though they'd clearly never met. "I'm Sheriff Holt," he responded, squatting down to Jamie's level. "The man who keeps the peace around here. That means I need to know when trouble's coming." "I ain't trouble," Jamie declared, though his actions suggested otherwise. "We'll see." Caleb straightened, addressing Addie. "I have reviewed the paperwork on previous placements. Some thorough, some lacking. I'd like to see your records before any decisions are made." Addie clutched her satchel tightly. "The official documents are available to the committee. As for my personal notes, they remain private." Something like respect flickered across his face. "Fair enough. Just know I'll be watching, Miss Montgomery." As he walked away, Addie felt a strange tingle of awareness. Sheriff Caleb Holt would certainly complicate her work in Timber Ridge. The placement meeting at the church was everything Addie had come to dread. Despite her best efforts to maintain dignity for her charges, the process always felt like a livestock auction. Bunting decorated the church hall and refreshments were laid out as if for a social, but the underlying purpose remained the same. The children stood in their best clothes, performing songs and reciting Bible verses, while prospective families circulated, examining them like merchandise. "Does the girl know how to cook?" a farmer's wife asked about 8-year-old Emily. "She's eager to learn domestic skills," Addie replied diplomatically. Across the room, she noticed Sheriff Holt leaning against the wall, observing everything with those penetrating eyes. Unlike most, he wasn't scrutinizing the children, but watching the adults' behavior. One by one, the children found placements. The Miller family took 7-year-old twins Sarah and Samuel. The blacksmith claimed 14-year-old Thomas as an apprentice. Even shy little Mary Beth was chosen by a kindly spinster. But Jamie predictably sabotaged every interaction. "I don't like getting up early," he announced to a farming couple who inquired about his work habits. When asked if he had any experience with animals, he launched into a violent coughing fit that had the wife backing away in alarm. And when a man who introduced himself as Mr. Hargrove mentioned their need for help since their farmhand left, Jamie innocently asked, "Did he run away 'cause you didn't pay him, or 'cause you beat him?" By the end of the meeting, 11 children had placement agreements, and Jamie stood alone by the refreshment table, cramming cookies into his mouth with feigned indifference. "I'd like to have a word with you, Miss Montgomery." Caleb appeared beside her, gesturing toward the church vestibule. Once they were alone, he didn't mince words. "That boy has no chance of placement here if he continues that performance." "Jamie has had difficult experiences," Addie defended. "He needs patience and understanding." "What he needs is someone who won't tolerate his manipulations," Caleb countered. "I've read his file. 3 failed placements in 18 months. Addie felt her temper flare. "And did you read why those placements failed? The first family used him as a field hand and denied him schooling. The second locked him in a cellar for wetting the bed. The third returned him when their natural child was born, like discarding a toy they no longer wanted." Caleb's expression remained impassive. "And yet you keep placing children in a broken system." "I am trying to fix it from within," she hissed, forgetting propriety. "What exactly are you doing to help, Sheriff, beyond casting judgment?" Before he could answer, Mrs. Wilson bustled over. "Miss Montgomery, wonderful news. All the children have been placed except—" Her gaze drifted to Jamie, who was now slouched in a corner chair. "Except Jamie," Addie finished. "I'll need more time to find a proper placement for him." "But the train leaves tomorrow morning," Mrs. Wilson protested. Addie squared her shoulders. "Then I'll be staying behind until suitable arrangements can be made." She turned to the sheriff, challenge in her eyes. "I believe this town has a boarding house? Jamie and I will need accommodations." Caleb's mouth twitched in what might have been surprise or grudging respect. "I'll escort you there myself." Mrs. Peterson's boarding house sat 3 blocks from the church, a modest 2-story structure with a well-kept garden and clean curtains in every window. "Adelaide Montgomery and Janie Sullivan, is it?" The plump widow appraised them with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I've got 1 room left, in the attic. It'll have to do for both of you." "That's fine, thank you," Addie said graciously, though internally she worried about the propriety of sharing a room with Jamie. Still, she'd slept in worse conditions. The attic room was small but clean, with sloped ceilings and a single window overlooking the main street. A narrow bed occupied one wall, while a trundle bed was stored beneath it. "The bathroom's down the hall, breakfast at 6, dinner at 6. You miss it, you go hungry." Despite her gruff manner, Mrs. Peterson's eyes softened when she looked at Jamie. "There's fresh cookies in the kitchen if the boy's hungry now." Jamie glanced at Addie, who nodded permission. After he scampered downstairs, Mrs. Peterson lingered. "That one's had a tough go, hasn't he?" Addie sighed. "Is it that obvious?" "Honey, I've been taking in strays, human and animal, for 40 years. I know that look." She patted Addie's hand. "You get settled in. Supper's in an hour." That night, Addie lay awake, listening to Jamie's restless turning on the trundle bed. Just after midnight, he cried out in his sleep. "Jamie," she whispered, kneeling beside his bed. "Jamie, wake up. You're dreaming." His eyes flew open, wild with fear, until recognition dawned. "Miss Montgomery? You were having a nightmare. Do you want to talk about it?" He shook his head, then whispered. It was the cellar again, dark. "Rats." Addie's heart broke a little more. "No one will put you in a cellar again, Jamie. I promise." "You can't promise that." "You'll leave soon as someone takes me." She had no reply, because technically he was right. Instead, she stroked his hair until his breathing slowed and he drifted back to sleep. In the morning, she found Jamie already downstairs helping Mrs. Peterson set the breakfast table. "Early riser after all," Addie teased gently. "Mrs. Peterson said I could collect eggs from the henhouse tomorrow if I help with chores," Jamie explained, something like enthusiasm in his voice. "And a fine help he is, too," Mrs. Peterson declared, "unlike my other boarders who can't even carry their own dishes to the sink." After breakfast, Addie settled at the small desk in their room to write reports and letters. She described each placement in careful detail for the society records, then wrote a separate, more honest assessment in her private notebook. "Mr. and Mrs. Abernathy appear kind, but expect Mary Beth to work in their shop from 7 a.m. until 6 p.m. with no mention of school attendance," she wrote. "I have stressed importance of education, but suspect compliance will be limited," she added to her growing list of improvements needed in the orphan train system. 1. Regular housing inspections after placement. 2. Mandatory school enrollment for all children under 14. 3. Limits on working hours according to age. 4. Local advocate assigned to each child. Someday, perhaps someone with authority would listen. A few hours later, Addie met with committee members to discuss Jamie's situation. Jamie explored Timber Ridge on his own. The mining town bustled with activity. Ore carts rattled toward the smelter, merchants hawked wares, and miners spent their pay in one of the 3 saloons. Near the livery stable, Jamie encountered 3 boys about his age. "Hey, you're one of them orphan train kids," the tallest sneered. "My pa says you're city garbage they're dumping out west." Jamie's fists clenched. "Your pa sounds stupid." "At least I got a pa," the boy taunted. "You ain't got nobody." Before Jamie could respond, shouting erupted from the saloon across the street. 2 disheveled miners stumbled out, trading punches as a crowd gathered. Sheriff Holt appeared seemingly from nowhere, physically separating the men with surprising ease for someone who wasn't exceptionally large, just compact and strong. "Randall, Jenkins, that's enough." His voice cut through the commotion. "You're claiming Jenkins shorted you at cards. Jenkins, you're saying Randall called you a cheat. Both of you cool off in separate cells for the night." As the sheriff marched the men toward the jailhouse, he caught sight of Jamie watching. Something unreadable passed across his face before he handed the miners off to a deputy. "Jamie Sullivan, isn't it?" he asked, approaching Jamie. The local boys scattered at the sheriff's presence. Jamie nodded warily. "Are you having trouble with those boys?" "Nothing I can't handle," Jamie replied, trying to sound tough. To Jamie's surprise, Sheriff Holt's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Are you hungry? I was about to get something at the general store." A few minutes later, Jamie found himself perched on a barrel outside the store, sucking on a peppermint stick the sheriff had purchased. "Do you like to draw?" Caleb asked, noting the charcoal-smudged fingers. Jamie shrugged. "Sometimes, when I can find paper." The sheriff studied him. "Is Miss Montgomery treating you all right?" "She's fine. Different from the others." "Different? How?" Jamie considered the question seriously. "She actually gives a damn." He paused, waiting for a reprimand about his language that didn't come. "About what happens to us after. Most just drop us off and forget us." Sheriff Holt nodded slowly. "You're observant. Good quality in a man." "On 10, Jamie pointed out. "Yes, well, won't be 10 forever." The sheriff straightened. "Stay out of trouble, Jamie. And maybe stay clear of those boys unless you want your nose rearranged." As the sheriff walked away, Jamie stared after him, unsure what to make of the conversation. Adults usually talked down to him or ignored him completely. Sheriff Holt had spoken to him like he mattered. Part 2. After her meeting with the committee members, to which nothing had been decided about Jamie's situation, Addie found herself volunteering at the small schoolhouse. Miss Winters, the young teacher, gratefully accepted help with the younger children's reading lessons. "You're quite good with them," Miss Winters observed during the lunch break. "Have you taught before?" "Only informally on the orphan trains," Addie explained. "Many of the children have had little or no education. Like that boy you brought, Jamie?" Will he be joining us while he's in town?" "I hope so," Addie replied. "He's bright, but doesn't apply himself because he assumes he'll be required to work instead of study." Miss Winters lowered her voice. "Sheriff Holt insists all children in our jurisdiction attend school, regardless of their work situations. He's quite adamant about it." "Really?" Addie couldn't hide her surprise. "He struck me as rather severe." Miss Winters laughed. "Oh, he can be, but he has his principles. Did you know he donates books to the school? Never wants recognition, but every month a package arrives from Denver with books about history, science, and literature." "How long has he been sheriff here?" "About 8 years now. He was a deputy first, but then the old sheriff retired. Nobody knows much about where he came from before that. He keeps to himself, but he is as fair as they come." Miss Winters blushed slightly. "Half the unmarried women in town have set their caps for him, but he's shown no interest." Addie found herself unreasonably pleased by this information, then immediately chastised herself for the thought. Over the next few days, Addie and Jamie settled into a routine. They helped with chores at Mrs. Peterson's, and Jamie reluctantly attended school while Addie continued meeting with potential families on behalf of the young boy. Then came the fishing incident. "The sheriff's looking for you," Mrs. Peterson announced as Jamie tried to sneak in the back door after school. "He said you'd better return Mr. Hollister's fishing pole before sundown." Jamie's face fell. "It was just sitting there. I was going to bring it back." "That's called borrowing without asking, which most folks call stealing," Mrs. Peterson said sternly. "Off with you now. The sheriff's down by Timber Creek." Addie offered to accompany him, but Jamie insisted on handling it himself. Pride warred with fear on his small face as he trudged toward the creek, the too large fishing pole dragging behind him. He found Sheriff Holt sitting on the bank, whittling a piece of wood. "Mr. Hollister says this is his," Jamie mumbled, holding out the pole. The sheriff didn't look up from his whittling. "Is that so? And how did it come to be in your possession?" "He was just sitting outside his shop. I was going to return it. After you caught some fish, I assume." Jamie kicked at a stone. "Maybe. You need to return it and apologize to Mr. Hollister. Then, if you still want to fish, come see me tomorrow." Jamie's head snapped up. "You ain't taking me to jail?" Now Caleb looked at him, those piercing blue eyes assessing. "No, Jamie, I am not taking you to jail for borrowing a fishing pole. But actions have consequences, and you need to face them." The next day, after a sheepish apology to Mr. Hollister, Jamie found the sheriff waiting at the boarding house with a spare fishing pole and a tin of worms. Addie watched from the window, a strange warmth spreading through her chest as she watched Caleb teach Jamie how to bait a hook. As they headed towards the creek together, she found herself wanting to join them. There was something about the stern lawman's gentle patience that touched her deeply. That evening, Jamie proudly presented Mrs. Peterson with 2 small trout for dinner. "Sheriff Holt showed me how to clean 'em, too," he declared. "He said I did a fine job for a city boy." Mrs. Peterson cast a knowing look at Addie. "The sheriff seems to have taken an interest in your boy." "He's not my boy," Addie replied automatically, though the words lacked conviction. "Mm-hmm," was all Mrs. Peterson said, but her expression spoke volumes. The fragile peace shattered 3 days later when Jamie got into a fight defending another orphan trained child who had been placed with the town's blacksmith. "Your son started it," Addie protested as Mr. Tucker, the general store owner, demanded Jamie be punished for bloodying his son's nose. "My boy was just speaking the truth," Tucker insisted. "These orphan-trained children are nothing but trouble. That Sullivan boy attacked my son unprovoked." "That's not what Timothy says," Addie countered. "Your son was tormenting him about being unwanted, calling him leftovers nobody would take." Jamie was defending Timothy. Sheriff Holt arrived, taking in the scene. Tucker's son with a bloody nose and split lip, Jamie with a rapidly blackening eye. "Tucker, take your boy home and tend to that nose," he directed. "Miss Montgomery, I'll need to speak with Jamie." "I'll come with you." "Alone, if you please," Caleb insisted firmly. "I'll escort him to my office." Before Addie could protest further, he led Jamie away, one hand resting lightly on the boy's shoulder. 20 minutes later, Addie burst into the sheriff's office to find Jamie sitting calmly in a cell, sketching on a piece of paper. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded of Caleb. "Locking up a child for defending another against bullies?" "I'm keeping him safe from Tucker, who's threatening to press charges," Caleb replied evenly. "And giving him a quiet place to cool off." He gestured to Jamie, who seemed utterly unbothered by his surroundings. "As you can see, he is hardly suffering." "This is outrageous. You're treating him like a criminal when he was defending another child." Caleb leaned back in his chair, regarding her with those unfathomable eyes. "Sometimes following rules isn't as important as doing what's right." The statement caught Addie off guard, coming from a lawman. I don't understand." "Don't you?" His gaze sharpened. "You pretend to believe in the society's system, Miss Montgomery, but I've seen your private notebook. Those aren't the records of someone who trusts the process." Addie felt herself flush. "You went through my belongings?" "Of course not, but I notice things. You write 2 sets of reports, one official and one personal. You're working within a broken system while trying to change it." He leaned forward. "I respect that. More than you know." His unexpected understanding disarmed her completely. "Then why are you so hard on Jamie?" Caleb's expression softened fractionally. "Because I know what it's like to be sized up like a prize horse and to be judged on your ability to work rather than your character." Before Addie could process this revelation, the door opened and Mr. Hargrove, a prosperous farmer from outside town, entered. "Sheriff, Mrs. Hargrove and I have been discussing the Sullivan boy," he announced. "Since he's proving difficult to place, we might consider taking him on." Addie's heart sank. She was aware that the Hargroves ran the largest farm in the county and were respected citizens, but something about them had struck her as coldly calculating. "That's very generous," she managed, professional mask sliding back into place. "Perhaps we could discuss the details tomorrow? I'll bring Jamie to your farm for a visit." "Of course. We'll expect you at our farm at 10, Mr. Hargrove nodded to the sheriff before departing. After he left, Addie and Caleb exchanged a look that held volumes of unspoken concern. "The Hargroves are prominent citizens," Caleb said carefully, "but they've lost 2 farmhands to gold fever in the past year." "I see." Addie's voice was equally measured. "And their primary interest in Jamie would be—" It's hard to say, but his expression suggested he knew exactly what their interest was, and it had nothing to do with providing a loving home. From the cell, Jamie watched this exchange with sharp eyes that missed nothing. 5 days after their arrival in Timber Ridge, Addie's relationship with Caleb remained cordial but wary. They circled each other like cautious dancers, professional in public, their private conversations charged with unspoken understanding. Addie found herself increasingly curious about the enigmatic lawman. His comment about being sized up like a prize horse haunted her, as did his surprising defense of Jamie's actions. So when she spotted Caleb leaving town on horseback that evening, saddlebags packed and a small bouquet of wildflowers in hand, curiosity overwhelmed her better judgment. "Mrs. Peterson," she called, hurrying downstairs. "Might I borrow your mare for a few hours? I'd like to explore the countryside while there's still daylight." The widow raised a skeptical eyebrow. Would this countryside happen to be in the same direction as Sheriff Holt just rode off to? Heat flooded Addie's cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you don't, dear," Mrs. Peterson sighed. "The mare's name is Daisy. She's gentle but willful, rather like yourself." 20 minutes later, Addie followed Caleb's trail at a discreet distance. He rode purposefully, not like a man on patrol, but someone with a specific destination in mind. When he turned off the main road onto a barely visible trail leading into the foothills, Addie hesitated. Following him through town would be improper enough, but this felt like a more significant invasion of privacy. Still, something compelled her forward. The trail ended at a small clearing where a dilapidated cabin stood beside a grove of aspen trees. Beyond the cabin, Addie could just make out weathered wooden crosses marking a small cemetery. From behind a stand of pines, she watched as Caleb dismounted and walked directly to one of the graves. He knelt, clearing away weeds before placing the wild flowers carefully on the mound. His lips moved, though she was too far away to hear words. As she shifted for a better view, Daisy whinnied softly. Caleb's head snapped up, hand moving to his holster in one fluid motion. "Who's there?" he called, voice hard. "Show yourself." Mortified at being caught, Addie had no choice but to emerge from her hiding place. "It's just me. I'm sorry for intruding." Caleb's face darkened with anger. "You followed me?" "I was concerned about you," she offered lamely, knowing how flimsy the excuse sounded. Concerned or curious, his tone was cutting. "Either way, Miss Montgomery, this is a significant overstepping of boundaries." "You're right. I apologize." She turned to leave, shame burning her cheeks. "Wait." His voice had lost its edge. "Since you're already here, you might as well know why." Addie approached cautiously, leading Daisy. As she drew closer to the grave, she could read the hand-carved marker. Thomas Holt, beloved brother, born 1859, died 1873. "Your brother?" she whispered. Caleb nodded, and for the first time since she'd met him, vulnerability showed in his eyes. Before he could speak, thunder rumbled overhead, and fat raindrops began to fall. "I'm sure you noticed the cabin over there," he said, gesturing to the abandoned structure. "It's not much, but it'll keep us dry until this passes." Inside, the single room was dusty but intact. Caleb lit a small lantern he retrieved from his saddlebags, casting the space in a warm glow. A broken table, a rusted stove, and a sagging cot were the only furnishings. "Is this your cabin?" Addie asked softly. "No." Caleb settled on an upturned crate, his tall frame somehow making the small space feel even smaller. "This was a line shack for the old Circle H ranch. Nobody's used it in years except passing travelers." The rain intensified, drumming on the roof. When it became clear they were trapped for the duration of the storm, an uneasy silence fell. "I won't ask if you don't want to tell me," Addie finally said, "but I suspect your story and Jamie's have more in common than he knows." Caleb's gaze fixed on the lantern flame. "You're very perceptive, Miss Montgomery." After a long moment, he continued. "Thomas and I came west on an orphan train in 1868. Our mother died of consumption, and we had no father to speak of. I was 12, Thomas was 8. The admission struck Addie like a physical blow, though some part of her had begun to suspect. "You were an orphan train rider?" "We were placed with a farmer in Nebraska, Ethan Gardner." Caleb's voice took on a distant quality. It was a big operation and needed workers. "Mr. Gardner chose us because I was strong for my age, and Thomas," he swallowed hard. "Thomas was young enough to be properly trained," as he put it. Addie's heart ached, knowing all too well what properly trained often meant. "Mr. Gardner worked us from dawn till dusk, no school, barely enough food, sleeping in a barn through winter." His hands clenched. "I tried to protect Thomas and took beatings meant for him, but then he got sick." Caleb fell silent, staring at nothing, lost in memory. "He had pneumonia, probably. Mr. Gardner refused to send for a doctor. He said it was a waste of money on an orphan. Thomas died in that barn, holding my hand, telling me not to worry." His voice broke slightly. "I was 14 years old." Addie moved without thinking, crossing to kneel beside him. "I'm so sorry. I buried him myself. Mr. Gardner wouldn't even help dig the grave." Caleb's eyes shimmered with unshed tears in the lantern light. "I ran that night and vowed I'd come back for my brother someday. It took me 10 years of wandering, working whatever jobs I could find. Some legal, some not so much." "How did you become a sheriff?" she asked gently. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I got caught stealing a horse when I was 22. The marshal who arrested me, Mr. Miller, saw something in me. He gave me a choice, spend some time in jail or become his deputy. He said I could use my knowledge of how outlaws think to catch them instead of becoming one." He sounds like a wise man. He was. He taught me that the law, applied with compassion, could protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Caleb looked directly at Addie. When I became sheriff, I had Thomas's body moved to this small cemetery. I visit him every month. The pieces fell into place. His skepticism about the orphan train, his protection of Jamie, his insistence on education for all children. And that's why you've taken an interest in Jamie? He reminds me of Thomas, Caleb admitted. That same defiance hiding fear, the same sharp mind with no outlet. Rain continued to pour, and in the intimate confines of the cabin something shifted between them. A recognition of shared purpose and shared pain. My experience wasn't as tragic as yours, Addie said softly, but I understand more than most. She told him about her placement in Michigan, the backbreaking labor and the broken promises. She spoke about the farmer who began looking at her differently as she turned 15, and then her escape to Detroit. She explained about the textile mill work that nearly ruined her lungs, and finally, her rescue by Eleanor Hartwick of the Children's Aid Society. Eleanor believed the system could work with proper oversight, Addie explained. She encouraged me to become a chaperone, to document conditions and build a case for reform. From his saddlebags, Caleb produced a flask. Not entirely proper to offer a lady whiskey, he said with a small smile, but it's what I have. Addie accepted, taking a small sip that burned pleasantly. I've never told anyone the full truth about my past. The society believes I was properly placed and simply aged out of the system. We all have our necessary secrets. Caleb took the flask back, his fingers brushing hers in a contact that sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the whiskey. As the night deepened, they talked of Jamie, of the system's failures, and of potential solutions. When the temperature dropped, Caleb built a small fire in the stove and draped his coat over Addie's shoulders. "What about the Hargroves?" she asked as they huddled near the stove's warmth. "Why would they suddenly want Jamie when they've shown no interest in orphan trained children before? Their last farmhand left for the gold fields 3 weeks ago," Caleb explained. "Harvest is coming. They need hands, and Jamie's old enough to be useful, but young enough to control." "I can't place him there," Addie whispered. "I'd be consigning him to the same fate you and Thomas suffered." "I know." Caleb's voice was gentle. "But what's the alternative?" Neither had an answer, but as they sat side by side through the night, something profound connected them. Not merely attraction, though that hummed beneath the surface, but a shared mission. They had a shared understanding of what it meant to be discarded, to survive, and to want better for those who came after. Just before dawn, the rain finally stopped. They rode back to town in companionable silence, the intimate confessions of the night creating a bond words couldn't capture. As they reached the outskirts of Timber Ridge, Caleb cleared his throat. "People will talk if they see us returning together at this hour." "Don't worry about my reputation, Sheriff," Addie replied with a small smile. "I've faced worse than gossip." "It's not just that." He looked uncomfortable. "If the committee thinks we're involved, it could compromise your position regarding Jamie's placement." His consideration touched her. "Thank you. I'll circle around and come in from the east." Before they parted, Caleb reached across the space between their horses, briefly touching her hand. "Thank you, Addie, for listening." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice lingered in her mind long after they'd gone their separate ways. Part 3. The Hargroves were exactly as Addie feared, respectable on the surface, but cold-eyed when discussing Jamie's potential place in their household. "He'll sleep in the loft above the kitchen," Mrs. Hargrove explained, showing Addie the cramped space accessed by a ladder. "It gets a bit warm in summer, but he'll manage." "And his schooling?" Addie pressed. Mr. Hargrove waved a dismissive hand. "The town's 5 miles away. There is no sense wasting daylight hours on books when there's work to be done." "The agreement requires regular school attendance," Addie insisted. "During winter, perhaps," Mrs. Hargrove conceded, "when the farm work slows down." By the time they returned to town, Addie felt physically ill. The placement was technically acceptable by society standards. The Hargroves were respected, their farm prosperous, and the accommodations adequate. But she knew in her heart it would destroy Jamie's spirit. That night she wrote a desperate letter to her supervisor at the society, requesting more time to find a suitable placement. She proposed bringing Jamie back to New York if necessary, though her heart rebelled at the thought of returning him to the impersonal institution. The next morning, Mrs. Peterson's cry woke Addie from a fitful sleep. "He's gone, the boy's gone." Mrs. Peterson had been able to provide Jemmy with his own room the day before, which was located just off the kitchen, and Addie now hurried there to find his bed empty, his few possessions missing. On his pillow lay a crude drawing of 3 figures: a tall man with a star on his chest, a woman with long hair, and a small boy between them. On the back, in childish script, "I won't go to the Hargroves." He must have overheard us discussing the placement, Addie realized, heart pounding with fear. When did anyone last see him? "He helped me set the table for dinner last night," Mrs. Peterson recalled. "He said he was tired and went to bed early." Addie dressed hastily and raced to the sheriff's office, panic rising with each step. Tinder Ridge might be small, but the surrounding wilderness was vast and dangerous. Caleb was already at his desk when she burst into his office, breathless from running. "Jamie's run away. He took his things and left in the night." To his credit, Caleb demanded no explanations, asking only practical questions. When was Jamie last seen? Did he take food? Warm clothing? Within an hour, he had organized search parties. Miners, shopkeepers, and even Mrs. Wilson and the pastor joined the effort. Maps of the area were spread across Caleb's desk as he assigned search quadrants. "Most children follow roads or railroads when they run," he explained. "But Jamie's clever. He might deliberately avoid obvious routes." A deputy returned from the general store with news that confirmed this theory. "Mr. Hollister says some jerky and hardtack are missing from his back storeroom, and Mr. Miller at the livery noticed one of his saddle blankets was gone. Is planning to hide out in the mountains nearby," Caleb concluded. "That's something at least." When Caleb assigned Addie to search with Mrs. Peterson, she protested. "I'm coming with you. I know Jamie best." "The mountains are dangerous, especially for someone not used to the terrain," he countered. "I'm stronger than I look, Caleb, and if we find him, he's more likely to come willingly if I'm there." Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills until Caleb relented. "Stay close to me, and follow my instructions without argument." As they rode into the foothills, Addie was painfully aware of time passing. The mountains were cold at night, and wildlife posed real dangers to a city boy unused to the wilderness. "He's a clever boy," Caleb reassured her, reading her thoughts. "Most likely he's found shelter somewhere." "This is my fault," Addie confessed as they followed a narrow deer trail. "I should have been more careful with the placement papers. I should have been more open with him about his possible placement." "Jamie made his own choice," Caleb replied firmly. "Children like Jamie and me, like you, we learn early to take matters into our own hands when adults fail us." "You ran away too?" "4 times with my brother before he got sick," Caleb confirmed. "After the 4th time, Mr. Gardner chained me to the barn post at night." The casual way he mentioned such cruelty broke Addie's heart. No wonder he understood Jamie so well. They rode for hours, finding signs of Jamie's passage. There was a piece of fabric caught on a branch and footprints by a stream. The evidence led toward the mountains rather than the road east as they'd initially expected. "It looks like he is heading for the mining claims," Caleb realized as the afternoon shadows lengthened. "There are caves and abandoned shacks where he could hide." "Are you sure?" Addie's concern deepened. "The storm we had a few days ago caused the creek to deepen." Caleb's grim expression confirmed her fears. "We need to move faster." As dusk approached, storm clouds gathered again and Caleb's urgency increased. "There's an abandoned mine ahead. Timber Ridge started there before better claims were found downriver. If he's seeking shelter." "What's wrong with the old mine?" Addie asked, noting Caleb's worried tone. "It's unstable. The company abandoned it after a partial collapse killed 2 men." He released a controlled breath. It's exactly the kind of place a boy might think makes a good hideout. The entrance to the Timber Ridge mine loomed before them, a dark gash in the hillside partially obscured by fallen timbers. Recent footprints in the mud confirmed their worst fears. "Jamie," Addie called, her voice echoing in the darkness. "Jamie, it's Miss Montgomery. Please come out." Silence answered, broken only by the first drops of rain striking leaves. "We have to go in," Addie insisted. Caleb pulled a lantern from his saddlebags and lit it. "Stay close to me. Step exactly where I step. Don't touch the support beams." The mine tunnel was a nightmare. It was dark and damp, with ominous creaking sounds as water dripped through cracks above. They moved slowly, calling Jamie's name, and listening desperately for a response. A faint "help" finally answered from deeper in the mine. "Jamie!" Addie surged forward, but Caleb caught her arm. Careful, the ground could give way, he raised his voice. "Jamie, keep talking so we can find you." Following the boy's voice, they navigated deeper until they found a partial cave-in blocking the path. Beyond it, they could see Jamie trapped in a small chamber, his leg pinned beneath a fallen timber. "Miss Montgomery!" Jamie's voice cracked with relief and pain. "I'm sorry I ran away. I'm so sorry." "It's all right," Addie soothed. "We're going to get you out." Caleb assessed the situation with practiced calm. The beam's not too heavy, but moving it might trigger another collapse. He turned to Jamie. "Did you bump your head? Lose consciousness at all?" "No, sir," Jamie replied, fear making him unusually respectful. "Just my leg. I think it's broken." "You've been very brave," Caleb told him. "But I need you to be braver still. This is going to hurt when we move the beam, but you must stay quiet. Any loud noise could bring down more of the ceiling. Can you do that?" Jamie nodded, teeth clenched in determination. Caleb squeezed through the narrow opening to reach Jamie, with Addie close behind, despite his protests that she wait outside. Together, they carefully lifted the timber from Jamie's leg. The boy bit his lip until it bled, but made no sound beyond a muffled whimper. "That's a good man," Caleb praised, quickly examining the injury. "It's definitely broken. Let's get you out of here." Using his coat and some broken boards, Caleb constructed a makeshift stretcher. As they prepared to move, a deep rumbling sound froze them in place. "The rain's destabilizing everything," Caleb said tensely. "We need to move, now." They made their way back through the tunnel with agonizing slowness, Jamie biting back cries of pain with each jarring step. When a shower of dirt and small stones rained down from above, Caleb passed Jamie to Addie. "Get him out. I'll be right behind you." Addie wanted to protest, but knew every second counted. She half-carried, half-dragged Jamie toward the entrance, now visible as a faint gray patch in the darkness. Just as they reached safety, a thunderous crash sounded behind them. Addie turned to see the tunnel mouth filling with debris as sections of the ceiling collapsed. "Caleb!" she screamed, forgetting all propriety. For one terrible moment there was no response. Then the debris shifted and Caleb emerged, covered in dust and bleeding from a cut on his temple. "I'm all right," he assured her, helping move Jamie further from the unstable entrance. "Though that was closer than I'd like." In the rain-soaked darkness, their eyes met over Jamie's head, and something unspoken passed between them. Relief, yes, but also a recognition of how quickly priorities become clear when faced with loss. Dr. Fleming pronounced Jamie's ankle broken but cleanly set. "Bed rest for at least 2 weeks, then crutches for another month," he instructed. He was lucky. With the exposure and exhaustion, it could have been much worse. Jamie, subdued by pain and the doctor's laudanum, lay pale against the pillows in the doctor's spare room. Addie refused to leave his side, while Caleb handled the stream of curious visitors. In his fever-induced state, Jamie's defenses crumbled. "Don't send me away," he pleaded, clutching Addie's hand. "I don't want another family. No one ever really wants me." "Hush," Addie soothed, stroking his forehead. "We'll figure something out." "I want to stay with you," he murmured. "And Sheriff Holt. He's not mean like I thought he'd be. He saved me." The innocent admission pierced Addie's heart. For all his bravado, Jamie was still a child desperate for stability and affection. Late that night, after Jamie had fallen into a restless sleep, Caleb drew Addie into the hallway. "The doctor says there's possible damage to his lungs from the damp and cold," he reported in a low voice. "It may resolve, but—" He didn't need to finish the thought. They both remembered Thomas. "The society has telegraphed," Addie showed him a slip of paper with the ominous words. "They're ordering Jamie's immediate return to New York." Caleb's jaw tightened. "To be placed elsewhere? Or return to the orphanage?" "The orphanage, most likely. 3 failed placements. Makes him difficult to place by their standards." They stood in silence, the gravity of Jamie's situation weighing heavily on them. "There must be another option," Addie whispered. "But the doctor said he can't travel for at least a week, so we have some time before—" Caleb's hand found hers in the dim hallway, a brief, warm pressure. "Get some rest. We'll think more clearly tomorrow." But as Addie curled in an uncomfortable chair beside Jamie's bed, sleep eluded her. The society's rules were clear. She had a duty to return with Jamie or secure an approved placement. She knew that her job was on the line. Her heart, however, had never been less clear about what was right. 3 days passed. Jamie's fever broke, but he remained weak. The town buzzed with the dramatic rescue and speculated about the boy's future. The Hargroves withdrew their placement offer, citing Jamie's undisciplined nature as unsuitable for their household, much to Addie's relief. More troublingly, the placement committee met the next morning at the church and determined Jamie should be returned to New York as soon as he was well enough to travel. "The boy's actions demonstrate he's not suited for placement in our community," Mrs. Wilson announced with prim finality. "His actions demonstrate he's intelligent enough to recognize exploitation," Addie countered, but found herself outvoted. Alone in the church after the meeting, Addie contemplated her impossible position. What would happen when she took Jamie back to New York? She'd be sending him back to an overcrowded orphanage where boys his age were often put to work in factories or on city streets. Eleanor's advice echoed in her memory. "Work within the system, Adelaide. Change requires patience and persistence." But patience wouldn't help Jamie, whose fierce spirit would be crushed by institutional life. He needed a home now, with people who understood him. Addie was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't hear the church door open. When Caleb settled beside her in the pew, she started. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean to frighten you." "It's all right, I'm just trying to figure out what my next step will be." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the late afternoon sun streaming through stained glass and painting rainbow patterns across the wooden pews. "I've been thinking," Caleb finally said, his voice lower than usual, "about Jamie." "As have I," Addie sighed, not looking up. "The committee insists he return to New York. What if he didn't have to?" Caleb's voice was measured, careful. He moved closer to her, leaning an arm against the back of the pew. "What if there was another option?" Addie looked up sharply, suddenly aware of his proximity. The lamplight caught the glint of his badge and the unexpected softness in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I've considered it from every angle," he continued. "As sheriff, my standing in the community is secure. I own my home outright. It's small, but there's a second bedroom that's just gathering dust." Addie's heart began to race, not solely from hope for Jamie. "Caleb, are you saying—" "I could become Jamie's legal guardian," he stated it simply, though his eyes never left her face. "The school is 2 blocks away. He could help with safe tasks at the office, learn useful skills." "You'd do that?" Addie whispered, scarcely able to believe the solution could be so simple. Her hand unconsciously moved closer to his on the pew. "You were willing to take responsibility for Jamie?" "Why not? I was his age once, angry at the world, convinced no one would ever want me for myself." He met her gaze directly, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Jamie deserves better than what the system offers. So did Thomas. So did you and I." Relief and gratitude washed over Addie, followed quickly by a crushing realization. This solution meant she would return east without Jamie, without Caleb. The thought pierced her unexpectedly deeply. It's the perfect solution for Jamie, she agreed, unable to keep a note of sadness from her voice. She withdrew her hand, busying herself with gathering papers. The society might object initially, but with your position and a judge's approval, you don't sound entirely convinced, Caleb observed, studying her face. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the pine soap he used and see the day's stubble along his jaw. No, I am, it's just... She hesitated, fears and hopes tangling in her chest. I'll worry about him. About both of you, really. You could stay, Caleb suggested quietly, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. His fingers brushed her hand, sending warmth up her arm. Stay? Her voice sounded breathless even to her own ears. The town needs someone like you, he said, his eyes conveying so much more than his words. You understand these children in ways others don't. And Jamie would adjust better with both of us guiding him. The implication in his tone was unmistakable, hanging in the air between them. What do you mean? She asked, pretending not to understand, though her racing heart betrayed her. She needed him to say it plainly, needed to be certain. Caleb's throat worked as he swallowed. I mean, we could give Jamie a proper home. Together? Addie gave a sad smile, though her pulse fluttered wildly at his nearness. And do what? My work is with the society. She stepped away, needing distance to think clearly. Is it? Or is that just the path that seemed available when you had no other options? His gaze was penetrating, seeing through her carefully constructed professional shell. You don't believe in their methods any more than I do. She turned to look out the window at the darkening town, feeling his eyes on her back. Even so, I'll leave knowing Jamie is in good hands. She gathered her shawl, moving toward the door, but Caleb caught her wrist gently. The touch sent sparks through her. There are other reasons to stay, Addie, he said softly, his thumb caressing the inside of her wrist. Important ones. Their eyes locked, and for a moment Addie could see a future unfold. Mornings at the breakfast table, evenings on the porch, building something permanent and real. Think about it, Addie. Please. His voice was husky with emotion, his eyes conveying what he wasn't yet ready to put into words. She slipped her hand from his grasp, not trusting herself to remain any longer. Good night, Sheriff, she whispered, but as she stepped into the cool evening air, her fingers went to her wrist, still warm from his touch, and she allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what staying might mean. That evening, Addie visited Jamie at Mrs. Peterson's, where he'd been moved after the doctor declared him stable. She sat beside his bed, reading to him from one of Caleb's books, careful not to reveal her imminent departure. Sheriff Holt says I can help at his office when I'm better, Jamie told her excitedly. He says I got a good eye for details and might make a fine deputy someday. That's wonderful, Jamie, she smiled, memorizing his face, the dimple in his left cheek when he truly smiled, the cowlick that refused to lie flat. You'll stay too, won't you, Miss Montgomery? Jamie asked, suddenly serious. In Timber Ridge? Addie's throat tightened. My work with the society will... But you hate the society rules, Jamie protested. You're always writing in your secret notebook about how things should be different. She shouldn't have been surprised by his perception. Sometimes adults have to do things they don't entirely believe in because it's their duty. Jamie's expression turned mulish. That's not true. Sheriff Holt says a person's first duty is to their conscience. Does he now? Addie couldn't help smiling at Jamie quoting Caleb. They were already forming a bond, one that would only strengthen with time. Later, as Addie packed her belongings in the attic room, Mrs. Peterson appeared with tea and wisdom in equal measure. Running away, are you? The widow asked bluntly. Addie straightened. I'm not running away. I'm returning to my position. And leaving behind a boy who loves you and a man who could if you'd let him. Mrs. Peterson, that's highly inappropriate. The older woman shrugged. At my age, I haven't time for dancing around truths. That boy needs you, and Caleb Holt has looked at you like you hung the moon since the day you arrived. That's absurd. We barely tolerated each other at first. Sometimes the strongest foundations start with friction. Mrs. Peterson set down the tea tray. My Henry and I argued for 3 straight weeks when we first met. We were married 52 years before he passed. Addie had no reply to that. She sipped her tea in thoughtful silence. All I'm saying, Mrs. Peterson continued more gently, is that you should be very sure before you climb on that train. Some journeys take us away from home, others bring us to it. That night, Addie wrote her official report recommending Caleb as Jamie's guardian, citing his stability, community standing, and commitment to education. She also wrote her letter of resignation from the Children's Aid Society, explaining her concerns about the lack of oversight and follow-up for placed children. Finally, she wrote a letter to Jamie, explaining why she had to leave, but promising to write regularly. Each word felt like a small betrayal, but she convinced herself this clean break would be easier for everyone. Early the next morning, Addie slipped out of the boarding house and walked to the train station, her carpet bag clutched tightly. The eastbound train wouldn't arrive for an hour, but she couldn't bear tearful goodbyes. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the landscape in gold and pink, Timber Ridge stirred to life around her. Miners headed to their claims, shopkeepers unlocked their doors, and the smithy's forge glowed orange in the distance. Leaving without saying goodbye, Caleb's voice behind her sent a jolt through Addie's heart. She turned to find him standing a few paces away, looking as if he hadn't slept. "I thought it would be easier," she admitted. "Easier for whom?" He stepped closer. "Not for Jamie. We'll wake up to find you gone. Not for me, who—" He broke off, running a hand through his hair in rare agitation. "Not for you, who? What?" Addie prompted, her heartbeat quickening. Caleb took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Not for me, who has discovered that Timber Ridge was just a place until you arrived. Now it feels like somewhere that could be a home." The raw honesty in his voice stole Addie's breath. "Caleb, I'm not just offering a home to Jamie," he said, words coming faster now. "Timber Ridge needs someone who understands these children, who can ensure they're properly placed and cared for." His eyes held hers, vulnerable yet determined. "I need a partner who shares my vision for something better." "A partner?" Addie repeated, scarcely trusting her understanding. "In every sense of the word, if you're willing." He stepped closer still, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. "But even if that's too much to consider now, your work here isn't finished, Addie. It's just beginning." Conflict waged within her, duty versus desire, security versus risk. What about the society, the other orphan trains that will come? "I've been corresponding with Judge Holloway in Denver," Caleb revealed. "He's interested in establishing proper oversight for child placements throughout the territory. With your experience and documentation, you could help create something better than the society ever envisioned." Hope, bright and terrifying, bloomed in Addie's chest. "Do you really think we could change things?" "I know we could," he offered his hand. "Walk with me. There's something I want to show you." They strolled through the awakening town, their conversation flowing freely now. Practical details of how placements might be better monitored, how families could be supported, how children's welfare could be centered in the process. "Here," Caleb said finally, stopping before an empty storefront on Main Street. "The owner's been trying to lease it for months. I was thinking it could be a temporary home for children awaiting placement, somewhere clean and safe, with proper beds instead of being displayed like merchandise." Addie peered through the dusty windows, envisioning the space transformed. Bright curtains, books, proper meals. It would need funding. "The mine owners owe me favors," Caleb said with a hint of a smile, "and Mrs. Peterson has already volunteered to organize the women's auxiliary for furnishings and linens." "You've thought this through," Addie realized, touched by his thoroughness. "I've had little else on my mind since you arrived." The admission was simple but profound. They continued walking, ending up at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, where Jamie was just waking, his face lit with relief at seeing Addie. "You didn't leave?" he exclaimed. Addie glanced at her carpet bag, still clutched in her hand. After a moment's hesitation, she set it down and reached into her pocket, extracting her train ticket. With deliberate movements, she tore it in half. "No, Jamie, I didn't leave." The boy's smile could have outshone the sun. Epilogue. 1 year later. Montgomery House read the freshly painted sign above the converted storefront. Below it, smaller letters proclaimed, "Temporary Home for Children, Timber Ridge Children's Aid." Inside, 3 orphan train children newly arrived from New York slept in real beds with clean sheets. In the small office at the back, Addie completed her daily notes for Judge Holloway. "Our new placement procedures have resulted in 0 returns in the past 6 months," she wrote. "Regular inspections have identified 2 situations requiring intervention, both resolved with additional support rather than removal." A small sound made her look up. Jamie stood in the doorway, no longer the scrawny, defensive boy she'd met on the train. At 11, he'd grown 3 inches, and proper food had filled out his frame. More importantly, the wariness in his eyes had been replaced by quiet confidence. "Boss says to tell you he'll be late for supper," Jamie reported. "There's a dispute at Miller's saloon he needs to settle." "Thank you, Jamie." Addie smiled at the boy, who now legally bore Caleb's surname. "Did you finish your mathematics homework?" Jamie rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "Ages ago. Miss Winters says I'm ready for advanced lessons." "I'm not surprised. You have a fine mind when you choose to apply it." Pride flickered across his face at the praise. "Can I go help Mrs. Peterson with the new kids? The little one was crying earlier." "Of course." As Jamie left, Addie gazed around her small office with satisfaction. The framed certificate on the wall declared her the officially appointed children's advocate for Timber Ridge County, a position created through Judge Holloway's influence and funded by a consortium of mine owners and merchants. On her desk sat a photograph taken 3 months earlier, showing Addie in a simple white dress, beside Caleb in his Sunday best, Jamie standing proudly between them. Pastor Wilson had officiated at the small ceremony, and even Mrs. Wilson had dabbed tears when Caleb and Addie exchanged vows. To love and cherish, to build a family of choice where all are valued for who they are, not what they can provide, Caleb had promised, his voice steady but his eyes suspiciously bright. Their home above the sheriff's office was modest but comfortable, Jamie's room decorated with his increasingly skilled drawings. Each night when Caleb returned home, his first action was always the same, gathering both Addie and Jamie in an embrace that wordlessly promised protection and belonging. They'd face challenges, of course. The society had initially objected to Addie's new role, threatening legal action until Judge Holloway intervened. Some townspeople still muttered about those orphan-trained troublemakers, though such comments faded as the children integrated successfully into the community. And there had been personal adjustments. Addie had to learn to accept Caleb's occasional danger as sheriff, Caleb adapting to a household filled with conversation after years of solitude, and both of them navigating parenthood with a child who had known only institutional care or neglect. But those challenges paled against the joy of creating the family none of them had dared imagine. As twilight fell, Addie locked the Montgomery house door and headed home. She passed the saloon just as Caleb emerged, 2 chastened miners in tow. "Evening, Mrs. Holt," he called formally, though his eyes held private warmth. "I'll be along shortly." "Supper's waiting," she replied with an understanding smile. At home, Jamie had already set the table, a domestic skill he'd initially resisted but now took pride in. The 3 ate together, sharing stories of their day. There was Jamie's school triumph, Caleb's resolution of the saloon dispute, and Addie's progress with a difficult placement case. Later, after Jamie had gone to bed, Addie and Caleb sat on their small porch, watching stars appear above the mountains. "The next orphan train arrives Tuesday," Addie mentioned, leaning against his shoulder. 8 children this time. "Is Montgomery House ready for them?" "Almost. We need more blankets for winter." Caleb nodded, making a mental note. "I'll speak with the mercantile tomorrow." They sat in silence, his arm around her shoulders, her hand resting on his knee. the casual intimacy of two people who had found their way to each other through shared purpose and gradually discovered deeper connection. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked suddenly. "Staying, I mean. Giving up your position with the society?" Addie turned to study his face, still sometimes surprised by his moments of vulnerability. "Never," she said firmly. "This is where I belong. Where we all belong." He kissed her then, gentle at first, then with deepening intensity that still sent warmth spreading through her body. When they parted, his eyes held a question. "Yes," she whispered in answer, taking his hand and leading him inside to the home they'd built from broken pieces of the past and brave visions of the future. From his room, Jamie listened to their quiet laughter with a smile, feeling the security of knowing exactly where he belonged and who he belonged with. Tomorrow he would help welcome new children who wore the same fear and defiance he once had. He would tell them about Sheriff Holt, who was stern but fair, about Miss Addie, who fought for every child, about Montgomery House, where no one would be treated like a servant or a burden. Most importantly, he would tell them what he had learned in Timber Ridge, that family wasn't always what you were born into, but what you built together, one day at a time, and where the heart finally finds home.